What's going on, world? Welcome to my podcast. It's just different with Ty, where I talk about sports, social, political issues, you name it under the sun. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, right? Leave comments in the section below. Hit the notification bell so you get updated on the latest newest videos. Let's get right into it. I have someone who I just met, and he's full of knowledge and very intelligent. And I would even say he's definitely a historian. My brother Ike, please introduce the world to who you are.
Thank you, Ty. Thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to having a good back and forth on all these burning issues in world politics and so on. My name is Ike Nahem. I'm a retired locomotive engineer at Amtrak, proud member of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. Sorry for the sexist language that they haven't updated yet, which is a division of the Teamsters Union. I'm very involved in many struggles over many years. We can get into some of that history, but currently the focus of my political work is trying to fight the U.S. blockade against Cuba. It's an economic and political war, and we're building a movement on many fronts across the United States, Canada, hemispherically, and the world to try to mobilize against this horrible policies, which we can get into. But anyway, that's who I am, and I believe we met at a homage to Malcolm X that was attended by the president of Cuba at the wonderful Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Education on Memorial Center in Harlem, New York City, USA.
Harlem, New York City, USA. Correct. So briefly, real quick, tell us about your early life as far as where you from, how you grew up, so it could paint a picture as to why you talk about the fight that you've been in, and did your early childhood have an effect on that, or did certain things you see growing up make you want to say, hey, listen, I want to take on this fight, I want to bring attention and awareness to certain social justice issues?
Well, we're all products of our time and history. Within that, we can have a certain impact, but we're all reflecting bigger forces that we're sort of born into independently of our will. I'm not downplaying the role of our will, and I've always been a very willful person and involved in struggle. But the forces that shaped me, I grew up a lower middle class kid. I was born in New York City, raised mostly in the Midwest, went to school at Indiana University at a time in the late 1960s, early 1970s, where there was a deep radicalization happening in the United States that was animated and accelerated by the civil rights movement and the Black liberation struggle. I was very strongly influenced by Malcolm X, had my study of his writings beyond just reading the autobiography, which so many people had and were riveted by, but studying his actual writings, which have been compiled. And then also the Vietnam War. So all those things shaped me. There's a lot of personal factors that go into it that I could get into, detail of how when I went to college, with some knowledge politically, and always liked to read, but was more into athletics and sports probably than I was politics. But I got radicalized by the civil rights movement. I read Malcolm X. My first year of college, I took a course on the Cuban Revolution. You'd sign up for courses when the class opens up, and this was a school of 30,000. By the way, I'll tell you, this was Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. The student population was maybe 2% Black. But at that time, to give you an idea of how radicalized the political scene was, the students in an election where many thousands voted elected a member of the Black Panther Party student body president. And I was elected, yes, in the cornfields of Indiana. And I was elected a student senator with posters of Malcolm X and Che Guevara on my campaign literature. So that was we shut down that campus completely during the murders of Kent State and Jackson State after the U.S. invasion of Cambodia. But anyway, those were the forces that shaped me. It led me early on. I was talking about this class I took. This class was taught by a ex-CIA agent who became disillusioned with the policy. And it was a great class. The guy assigned some fabulous books. I read them. And, I became a supporter and defender of the Cuban Revolution. And to this day, and I find it a crime that the U.S. continues this blockade, tries to justify it, tries to rationalize it. And we have a growing movement in the United States against it. And I know that we will fight against it. We have very many committed people in the Black community and the labor movement, among young people, and so on. So so we could talk about that too.
So let me get this straight. All right. So you went to Indiana University, right? Where it was 2% Black, you said, right? And they elected a Black person, right, to be
Black Panther Party member.
A Black Panther Party member.
Right.
Which is crazy because from my understanding, I'm just putting this and grasping this all together. Indiana, my understanding, is the birthplace of KKK.
Well, I don't know about being the birthplace, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
They had a very strong KKK presence. Yeah. And in fact, the year before I went to college, the Klan had blown up a Black-owned market outside of Bloomington, where the campus is. And it led to a big struggle on the campus. So there was a history there.
And you learned or got more interested in the movement and the Cuban Revolutionary from an ex-CIA person, right? That used to work for the CIA, correct?
Who became a professor, and he happened to, I guess he got hired by Indiana University political science department. And there I saw in the curriculum the Cuban Revolution, and it was taught by this professor. And by then he had radicalized. He was sort of like, I don't know if you guys, if we maybe we can put it on the screen when we do the final product here, but the book Inside the Company by the guy Philip A.G., who was another CIA agent that actually completely ended up having to go into exile in Havana. But he wrote this book that exposed the crimes of the CIA from the inside. The book is called Inside the Company. The company was the euphemism that the CIA would use to describe itself in its fronts, business fronts and covers that they would function through.
So now you're in college and you're going through this whole new transition of just understanding who you are. How did your family feel about you taking on this new step where now you are, basically putting yourself out there, calling out the government? It's got to be probably,
Well, I should tell you, right? The FBI, which at the time had a very active, much of which is now public through Freedom of Information Act requests and so on. But the FBI had a very active COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, which they targeted Black activists, anti-war activists, left-wing organizations, and so on. They actually sent poison pen letters, and I've documented this, and to my parents. About my activities, saying I was disgracing the family. They did this to many, many people. My family was not involved in, but sympathetic to the civil rights movement. My father had come from a more radicalized background from the 1930s. And so he had a political conscience. My mother, more of a religious background, and was probably more conservative. But I remember when Martin Luther King cried, I used to have when Martin Luther King died, I remember my mother watching the funeral and getting all choked up about it. And I had not seen that side of her so much before. But you know, that was they were just a typical, in many ways, lower middle class Jewish family growing up in the Midwest. But when I landed at Indiana University, and I was already starting to gain a certain political consciousness, because my high school was a very interesting composition. I went from Indiana, where a high school that I went to was maybe 95% Caucasian. I don't like to use the term white because I think it's an artificial construct, but that's another question we could get into. But you know, it was about 40% white, middle class and working class, about 40% Black, overwhelmingly working class, and the rest were mostly middle class, lower middle class Jewish kids like me. So there were battles that were going on in that high school. This is 1967, 1968. A lot of the white and Black students united over the dress code, which was very draconian. This is Cincinnati, Ohio, conservative city. So we won that battle. Black students started wearing afros. Hippies started growing their hair long, and there was a united front around that. This was at a time when Martin Luther King was murdered. The city fathers in Cincinnati decided not to call off school, even though like a few weeks before, some guy that had once been the mayor 20 years ago had died, and they called off school for the day. So the Black students were pissed off. The radical students that supported the Black struggle were pissed off. So we basically closed down the school, and there were big urban uprisings, what they call riots, in Cincinnati and many other cities after Dr. King was murdered. And so that was quite an experience that I had already gone through in high school. So when I went to college, I was already radicalizing politically, and I go into this really boiling cauldron of anti-war and radical activities against the Vietnam War. And that was the atmosphere that allowed a school like Indiana University to elect a Black Panther. But those were also different times. That was a time when American capitalism needed a more educated, skilled workforce. So a lot of these universities, working class kids, including African Americans, could get access to, through the Big Ten and through some of these universities, a higher education and not be in debt for the rest of their lives like students today. And in that period, that's changed. Capitalism has changed. To go to Indiana University today, or Ohio State University, or practically any university, if you don't have a full scholarship or something, you'll be in debt for the rest of your life. So that's some of the changes. But I'm just trying to underline the things that shaped me, which I think, honestly, I know it's good that you're asking us, and I'm happy to talk about it, but it's less important than the struggles that I was attracted to, because that's what shaped me. I try to shape them and move them forward as part of a team of people that are fighting the blockade or fighting against police brutality or whatever issues that I'm able to still be active in at my ripening age.
You young, but
in my heart I am. That's for sure. And as Malcolm X said, some people get old in their teens.
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. So now you went in more to the dynamics of your family and their origin, their background, and they're Jewish, right? Correct?
Right.
So here you are, and it just popped in my head because you brought it up. Here you are, you're Jewish, and you find yourself in the middle of everything what's going on. And I want to know, and you're at, demonstrations, right? You're at, different rallies, protests, and as you're saying, talking about police brutality and other different things, inequalities, injustices. Did you ever find yourself in a place, did you ever say, man, maybe I'm Jewish, maybe I shouldn't be here? Do I fit in? how, did any I want to know, did any Black people or Hispanic people, did they ever say, hey man, you're not supposed to be here, this is for us,
I run
anything
into
like
very
that,
little of that. I run into some anti-Semitism. There is a current, among a certain layer of Black nationalists. And again, if you look at the history of Malcolm X, he can personify the shifts on that question. I've run into some of that, but overall, I found in my political activity that if you show respect to other people, they will show respect to you. And I've always felt welcomed, and if you're an honest ally of anybody's struggle. And I feel like in the case of Malcolm X, I mean, I grew up, like I said, as a lower middle class Jewish kid in the Midwest. But there was in the turmoil of those days, I was attracted to anytime oppressed people struggle. There will be a layer of people of all religions, nationalities, that will be attracted to that. I like to think, and I think I can show that, in the particular history of the Jewish people, and I'm a Sephardic Jew, difference between Sephardic Jews that come from the Middle East and Ashkenazi Jews that came out of Europe and that settled in the United States. Although those distinctions, when they come to the United States, like a lot of people that immigrate into the United States from other countries and that get amalgamated. But that's a whole other question that as a Marxist, we could analyze what we call the national question and how nationalities get formed. But out of that tradition, which I came out of, and to the degree that I studied it and understood it, there was definitely in the Jewish community in the 1930s and again in the 1960s, a whole layer of radicalizing young Jews that were attracted to the Black liberation struggle, that were attracted to people like Malcolm X and to all the struggle. So, I think that this generation of young people, a lot of that baggage that you referred to, I think a lot of young people today, and this is a good thing, have transcended that. We need united allies. It doesn't cut across anybody's identity or particularity of what forged them to unite and struggle around the things that we all need to move forward. And that's where class comes in any analysis of how to move any struggle forward, whether it's the Palestinian struggle, the struggle against police violence, against the blockade of Cuba, against racism, whatever.
Okay. So let me ask this. I got 10,000 questions going in my head right now. Got 10,000 questions. Okay, so I noticed a lot you talk about, you bring up a lot of times Malcolm X. And obviously he's someone that you definitely respect, looked up to, you felt inspired by. You wrote a beautiful, beautiful piece on Malcolm X, which I read twice, and I read it again last night. Why Malcolm X? Why Malcolm X? Yeah, and I'm gonna post it too. Why Malcolm X? Because you had so many other, Black leaders during that time, that was trying to speak to the people and globally. What was it about Malcolm X that made you say, no, I have to write about him?
Well, Malcolm X is such an incredible figure in history and in US history, especially when you consider that he only lived to be 39 years old. And the last year and a half of his life, the trajectory that he was on and the how he was able to develop, it's just a lesson that I think everyone fighting for social justice has to assimilate. But again, I was in high school. I was sort of becoming a hippie and long hair. I used to go to this record store in downtown Cincinnati, and I used to buy, rock and roll music, soul music, when I could afford it. and I was just browsing around on the record stacks, and they had a spoken word section. And they had an album. It was $1.49. I think I wrote about this. You probably read about this in my essay. You know, it was called The Wit and Wisdom of Malcolm X. And I remember buying that, you know, I really dug it. It was really funny, incredibly witty, and I was learning so much. So I read the autobiography, and I just decided to do a deep study. Many people stop at the autobiography, and although the autobiography is a wonderful book and it's great literature and everybody should read it, but if you have to go beyond that and actually study his teachings, writings, speeches, interviews, all of which are compiled, all of which are still in print, and look them up or go to YouTube, read the speeches, because you'll get to see, if you take the time to study it, you'll get to see an amazing trajectory politically.
So you also, again, wrote another brilliant piece on the greatest, all right, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali. Same thing. What made you feel compelled to write about, you know, Muhammad Ali?
Well, you know, when I was younger, until I became really political, which was around, I was really mainly into sports. I loved baseball. When Sandy Koufax retired in 1967, and my favorite team, which was the Dodgers, probably because Jackie Robinson, when Major League Baseball was desegregated, was the Dodgers. And my uncle, this is another thing we could talk about. My uncle Sam Nahem, who was the big league pitcher, played an instrumental role in laying the basis for the desegregation of Major League Baseball. He was a communist. We could talk about my Uncle Sam also. But anyway, the other thing that I loved, it wasn't so much that I loved boxing so much, but I loved Muhammad Ali. I loved his swagger. I loved the way that he would just get in their face, and the humor, the wit. I just was enthralled by him. And the fact that he spoke out against the Vietnam War in the most eloquent terms, you know, was just another thing that just attracted me to him, as many, many people in the United States of all so-called races. But at the time that his title was stolen from him by the powers that be, because he refused to be inducted into the draft to go fight in Vietnam. At that time, he had no money. All of his funds, his whole way of making a living was stolen from him. So in order to survive and to live, because he wasn't incarcerated, he was free to travel while his case was being appealed and everything else. He would go on college campus tours to raise funds. And he came to Indiana University, where I was a student. And he was the biggest auditorium in the place was packed, 3,000 students, overwhelmingly Caucasian, wildly supportive, applauding. He gave a wonderful rap. Now, at that time, you know, I was already a Malcolm X freak. I had really long hair. I used to call it my Jufro.
You got any pictures? You got any pictures?
I don't have any now, but next time if I'm on again, you know, we could show some pictures. But let me tell you, it was really long. Yeah. And a lot of people didn't know what my quote race was. A lot of people, I remember my first day on campus with my long hair. I was busting my table at the cafeteria, and all the black students were sitting together. And this one black woman asked me if I was trying to pass, you know. So I confused a lot of people at that time. But anyway, I was covering Muhammad Ali's visit for the Radical newspaper on campus. And I was a little bitter towards Muhammad because he had sided with Elijah Muhammad against Malcolm X during the split. And, you know, I was full of self-righteousness at that young age and everything. And, you know, and plus it was a legitimate grief, which he later said was the greatest mistake of his entire life. Mm-hmm. You know, so anyway, I got up in the question and answer period And I asked him a very snarky question about Malcolm X and why he did that, and you know, he sloughed it off, and then afterwards, he didn't really answer it. Afterwards, I went up, and I was an awe guy, you know, despite that. And he saw me. I was sort of indispensable with my afro and everything, or not, you know, very distinguished looking, not sloppy looking actually. But anyway, so he came up to me and he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, brother, there's some things I just can't talk about. And so that was quite an experience.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Wow. So you definitely stood out from that. Wow. Wow. So I want to go back to something you said a few questions back about the relationship when I was asking about you being of Jewish descent. What I want to know is during those times, right, in the 60s, you know, from me, I wasn't born around that time, but from a lot of historical things from what I read and everything else, the Jewish community or some Jewish people were alongside with the struggle, as you say, whether even with the founding of the NAACP, some of the founding members were Jewish. Even, you know, when they walked with Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, different things. So fast forward into it now, it appears that if that relationship between Black people or African Americans, American Africans, wherever people they choose to identify themselves, you know, and the Jewish community, it's no longer there. It's just, you know, it appears like they don't really get along or even want to be associated with each other. That's how it's projected. What do you think?
I would not agree with.
And I'm not saying all. I'm not saying all. I'm just saying.
No. But I would say that, you know, there are distinct communities. There's interaction. There's in American politics today, and relations between different nationalities or groupings or whatever. Given that the powers that be are always trying to exacerbate divisions and so on and so forth, but there's a lot of polarization in all different communities. I think that historically there were layers of the Jewish community that, as you said, did support strongly the civil rights movement and allied with Black liberation struggles and figures. That was true, and it's something to be proud of. There were other layers in the 1980s and 90s, what's often called the neoconservatives, which sometimes were mistakenly, in my opinion, but seemed to be predominantly Jewish, more conservative, that were more hostile to the Black struggle and any progressive struggles. There was that polarization. I don't think it's that important politically. What's important politically is the alliances that get forged today. In New York City, for example, in the Cuba Solidarity Movement, there's a broad unity. And given the composition of New York City, that includes many Jewish people, many African Americans, other Puerto Ricans, Latinos, and that's always, to me, the thing to look to. Questions of you know, the relations between the Black community and the Jewish community, they're interesting, and I could talk about them for hours. I've studied them, but to me, all of these things get worked out in struggle. You know, the same is true with white racists in general. You overcome that through struggle. I've seen so many examples. I gave an example of Indiana University in that time. I don't think today at Indiana University, first of all, you got to pay $35,000 a year for tuition, whatever. I don't think Indiana University today would elect a member of the Black Panther Party as the student body president. But at the same time, if we know that history and we know what is possible when people unite and struggle, all kinds of prejudices and baggage can be overcome instantly. And that's in the time I got left on this earth, that's what I'm trying to examine. And Cuba, if we can get back to Cuba, Cuba's an example internationally of that in practice, because in Cuba, take the example of little Cuba, 11 million people, less at the time, that sent troops to Southern Africa that decisively, at that moment in history, defeated apartheid, defeated the apartheid state in Southern Africa. And in doing that, laid the basis for whatever elevation Africa has in the world today and what's going on in Africa. So this is history. And people that are interested in fighting for social justice, dedicating their lives to that, they need to connect to that history, because that's how you'll be most effective.
But let's get right into it, because I was going to get right into it, but you beat me to the punch. We're gonna get to some, questions on Cuba. So let's get ready. So can you explain the organization that you are currently involved in now? And
I'm involved in yeah, thank you. Well, I'm involved in two organizations. One, our base organization is in New York and New Jersey. It's called the New York, New Jersey Cuba Sea Coalition. We have a wonderful website. We're very involved in all kinds of activities, monthly caravans against the blockade, activities like tonight at the People's Forum with Belly of the Beast, and so on. I don't know if you have our website, but if you just Google New York, New Jersey, Cuba Sea Coalition, it'll come up. The other organization is national and really cross-border, US, Canada, and we're expanding hemispherically and internationally. It's called the International US-Cuba Normalization Conference Coalition. It's a long name, but it's basically a group of activists that got together really during the pandemic when everything was locked down. We started doing webinars. They were very successful, very well attended. We found that the Zoom technology allowed us to make links all over the world, all over the hemisphere, all over the United States, all over Canada. We've continued that. We built up strong organizations, and we're trying to expand the work. The way we look at it, US policy against Cuba, the blockade, has never been more isolated. It has never gotten less traction around the world, hemispherically, in the United States public opinion, even among Cuban Americans. But it continues, and its effect, its accumulated effect on the working people of Cuba is devastating. And we need to step up our game, because we got to resolve that contradiction. The policy has no support. It's hated around the world, and yet it continues. So words have to become translated into deeds. We have to do everything, shame, whatever it takes. There are 113 city councils, state assemblies, trade unions, religious institutions, other bodies, but mostly city councils from cities all over the United States that have passed anti-embargo, anti-blockade resolutions demanding that Cuba be taken off the state sponsors of terrorism list. This is what we're working towards very hard all the time.
And why don't you think the United States, they don't want Cuba, they want to continue to keep Cuba on this list?
Well, the United States, and this is part of the dilemma of our times, or the conundrum, really. The United States has so backed themselves into a corner politically with this blockade by continuing the policy, by Biden choosing, when he became president, he consciously chose, Secretary of State Antony Blinken consciously chose to continue Trump's measures, to continue Trump's policies, not to break with them, but to break with his promises to at least ameliorate them. Once they made that decision, they painted themselves in a corner. So now you are at the point where they are like a coiled. If they let up a little bit, they're like a coiled spring. If they ease up a little bit, because Biden could tomorrow just issue an executive order and take Cuba off SSOT. It's not hard to do. It's simple to do. But in doing so, they take away the pretext that companies, businesses, entities that want to or would trade with Cuba, that stigma of being on that list gives them an excuse and a cover not to do it, because there's consequences if you're an executive of a company and you invest in Cuba, you will be banned from the United States. United States is 330 million people. It's the biggest market in the world, and Cuba's 11 million people. It's a tiny market. They got some cool stuff, but it's not, no business person is going to risk their status and entry into the U.S. market for Cuba, or very, very few will. There's one guy in Canada. He's a capitalist. His name is Scarrett, I think. It's a company called Scarrett. Cuba happens to have some of the world's biggest reserves of nickel. It's a very important metal for industrial processes. This guy Scarrett chose that because his company has the expertise and the technology to mine that stuff and to train Cubans to do it. So the Cubans have made a deal with him, and he's doing that, but he pays a price. He can't go to the United States ever, his company. I mean, the way the blockade is set up now. So, that's an exception, but that's one example of how the blockade strangles Cuba. So SSOT, that's why we focused on that. That's easily done. Ending the blockade requires an act of Congress because Helms-Burton, Clinton codified all that into law.
I want to go over a couple of things historically from Cuba and United States relations. And of course, way more about this than me, but I'm just going to say a few things and you just, elaborate or talk about it with people insight that might not have heard this or even know about this. I read somewhere that the CIA, right? Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, they basically was trying to do something where they was trying to kill their own people on a plane or something like that, and try to make it seem like Cuban did it to try to invade Cuba. But go into that little history there. What? Well, how did that come about? Yeah. Why was it stopped, and what was the main goal and purpose of it? Go ahead, you got the floor.
One of the things that marks Cuba from other people that come under the scope and the targeting of the United States and the CIA, the US government, whatever, is that the Cubans are very savvy at responding and fighting back and exposing these tricks. There was a time after the Cuban Revolution when the US government decided that Fidel Castro was not somebody that was going to be bought off, that was not somebody that was going to be mollified, that the Cubans under Fidel's leadership, and you're dealing not with just Fidel, they try to make it seem as if it's a one-man show, but you had a whole team of revolutionaries, Che, Raul, Celia Sanchez, just dozens of conscious thinking people under the leadership of Fidel. And they were serious. They were serious about land reform. They were serious about ending illiteracy. They were serious about uprooting and smashing Jim Crow segregation. They did that 5 years before the U.S. Civil Rights Act. So they were serious about doing all those things. Now, the United States realized that they were serious and began to carry out plots to try to overthrow them. This was just one of the plots, because this is taking place in 60, 61, 62. This was the period of the most heat. This is the period of the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is the period of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the closest the world has ever got to nuclear conflagration. So in this period, the CIA sets up the most extensive, until Afghanistan decades later, base in Miami that every day practically is organizing raids into Cuba, organizing subversion, organizing sabotage, organizing assassination attempts. I'm not making this stuff up. It's part of the public record that's come out through people like the National Security Archive that do diligent work exposing these documents, which they save and preserve. That's one of the peccadillos of the U.S. Anyway, so this was one of those plots. They had a plot where they were steal some Cuban airliners. Cuba had a modest but fleet of airlines, most of which were U.S., and then they later got augmented with some MiGs from Soviet Union, which they used to defend their aerial territory and so on. The United States came up with a plot to steal a couple of these planes, paint them over with, I'm trying to remember the plot. I think paint them over with Soviet or paintings so that they could present to the UN some kind of thing that Cuba was a puppet of the Soviet Union or whatever like that. The Cubans managed to find this out, so they immediately went to the United Nations Security Council and exposed it. So, the United States is not used to dealing with people that respond so quickly and with such savvy. So that one was had to be stopped. There's hundreds of documented cases of assassination attempts against Fidel Castro. There's hundreds of documented cases of poisoning wells, blowing up ships before the Cubans turned to the Soviet Union for weapons to defend themselves, to arm the population. You talk about Second Amendment. They have a real Second Amendment in Cuba. Popular militia, they armed the population. But in order to get the guns to do that, they first went to Western allies of the United States. They tried to get a bunch of weapons from Belgium, which for some reason has a fabulous armaments industry. They bought and paid for them. They put them on a ship called La Cubre. The CIA blew up that ship in Havana Harbor. Hundreds of people were killed, hundreds. The famous picture of Che Guevara that everybody knows is a picture of him at the funeral service where he's in tears because of this mass murder. So that's just some of the history. There's a whole history of it.
Wow. So can you speak on a little bit the relationship, how the relationship started with, and we're gonna get back to that too. I'm just shooting off the hip, just whatever come to mind. Can you speak on that relationship with Che Guevara and Fidel Castro, how that started, the relationship with President Hugo Chavez and Fidel, how that all started, their mission, their goal, what was they trying to put out? Because again, due to propaganda, it's not really being told in its full, true honesty as a lot of Americans.
Well, it's worse than that actually, because there was a cottage industry in this period of misinformation and disinformation. I mean, I can tell you, and this is literally true. You had offices in the State Department and the CIA whose employees that were dedicated to just handing out BS. I don't know if I can spell out BS on your program, but BS on Cuba lies. Among the lies that they spread was that, because, Che was getting ready to go first to Congo and then Bolivia to try to build a revolutionary organization to fight against the Chombe dictatorship in Congo, and then the whole string of military regimes in Latin America at that time. And so he went underground. He had to get disguises, set up a base. So he disappeared from sight. So naturally, all these right-wing organs and the CIA and everybody, they started spreading these rumors. And you'd be amazed, unfortunately, a few leftists got sucked into it. But, Che has fallen out with Fidel. Fidel has imprisoned Che. Fidel has killed Che. I mean, it was amazing. So at one point, Fidel had to get up at a big mass meeting of foreign guests in Havana and read the famous letter from Che, just so people would know to cut across these rumors. But, this is part of the game. This is part of the struggle. The other side, when it comes to Cuba, the most egregious that, other propagandists that are professional propagandists would probably blush at. But when it comes to Cuba, the level of lies, the level of misinformation, it's astonishing when you consider that it's coming from a country a government that rules over 330 million people versus a country of 11 million people, all because of the example of their ideas. Cuba obviously is no military threat to the United States, is no commercial threat to the United States, it's no national security threat to the United States. It's the ideas that they represent that is the threat. That's what Fidel taught, and I agree with him.
Wow. So as it stands, and this is probably going back a little bit on Malcolm X, right? Can you talk about a little bit that relationship between Malcolm X and Fidel Castro? Because everybody see the picture of them sitting, but most people that I've spoken to, they don't really know that, or they don't even know how that came about with Fidel and Malcolm X, meeting each other and having this mutual love and respect for each other, and things of that nature.
There's a book that you should read. It's called Memories of a Meeting by Rosemary Mealy. That there's actually a book written about it. But let me just say a couple things, because it's a very interesting story. Because at the time that Malcolm and Fidel met, Malcolm was still in the Nation of Islam and under their discipline. The split with the Nation of Islam did not come until 63, 64. And then you have that last period. So when Malcolm went out of his way, when he saw that Fidel the delegation needed a hotel to stay at, to arrange for them to stay at the Nation of Islam. At the Hotel Teresa. So at that time, the Nation of Islam, although the harsh really split between Malcolm and them was coming later, and there's all kinds of reasons for that we can go into, that I've written about. But essentially, even in that period, the Nation of Islam had a position supporting the Cuban Revolution, seeing it as part of the wave of people of the what's now called the Global South rising up, people of color, and part of that revolution. And so Malcolm was already conscious of and supported the Cuban Revolution, even when he was in the Nation of Islam. When the split with the Nation of Islam came, he deepened that appreciation, because now Malcolm, he went to Mecca, he began to meet revolutionaries and Marxists, especially of all different skin tones and colors, and he began to broaden his internationalist outlook. And in that sense, by 1964, 65, the references to the Cuban Revolution and Malcolm's speeches are much deeper and much more profound. We know that at the time, shortly before he was murdered, we know that Malcolm tried to get Che Guevara, who was in New York at a UN meeting, to come up to Harlem. Unfortunately, because of security concerns, that never happened. But Malcolm X and the Cuban Revolution will always be connected in the heart and in the mind. And the visit of President Diaz-Canel that we met at, Ty, that was a beautiful thing. And the videos of it are beautiful. And I'm glad that connection was made. And I tip my hat to the Harlem Welcome Committee for putting that together.
Absolutely. So with that history of Malcolm X and the impact that he's made, not only on you, but so many people, like I said, the friendship between him and Mr. Castro. In Cuba, because I've never been to Cuba, always wanted to go. We'll visit there. Trust me, we'll visit there. And I know you basically live there pretty much.
Not quite, but I'll be happy to hook you up with a good tour. Lots of groups go there. IFCO Pastors for Peace, many groups, Venceremos Brigade. You really should go.
All right, I'm going to take you up on that. Long as you're there,
you could go visit the Malcolm X statue and Martin Luther King statue. There's a beautiful park where it's statues of both. It's a wonderful, moving experience.
Which is, I was going to ask a little bit. And you kind of answered that. Is there any type of statue or even in the school systems in Cuba, do they now did they before, even now, if you know, do they teach about Malcolm X in Cuba? Do you know?
Well, I know earlier this summer, I attended a wonderful seminar where the life and of Malcolm and Fidel and Revolutionist Walker was done at the University of Havana. I know the first Spanish language edition of the autobiography of Malcolm X was a Cuban edition. I don't know, but I certainly would not be surprised if Malcolm X is not now or will be again taught in a Cuban school system. Malcolm X is venerated in Cuba, as is Martin Luther King, and as is the whole legacy of the Black struggle. And it's not just some, superficial formal thing. They identify with that. They identify with that history. Fidel is among other things, a fluent in the history of the struggle against slavery, for example, in the United States, and the role of Lincoln and the abolitionists. This is something that's taken seriously. The Cubans see themselves as part of the whole hemispheric struggle, from the slave rebellion in Haiti to the struggles in Latin America for independence and sovereignty, to the fight against slavery up to today.
So how is Fidel Castro? Because again, if you're going by the media here, and it bothers me. I hate that. Hate's a strong word, but I truly dislike. And I don't know what, I'm gonna put hate on it. That when the media here in America, every time they want to interview someone that's from Cuba or Cuban descent, it's always something negative to say about Fidel Castro. And nobody's perfect. You're not going to have 100% everybody love you and everything else. But to me, I mark that off as, because the United States do not like Fidel, they're going to find people, even if they're not even Cuban, to say certain negative things about Castro. But as far as the people that are currently living in Cuba, how do most of the people, how do they view Fidel Castro?
Well, that's an important question. I'll try to deal with it, but I think it's important to preface this by saying that as Malcolm again said, a chicken cannot produce a duck egg. You can't expect the U.S. media to present a favorable view of the Cuban Revolution and of Fidel Castro. Having said that, we can force some objective discussion, some discussion that's not as hateful. The most important thing is for us to build our own media, our own networks, our own movement, so that we can speak our own truth and force them to tell some truth. But you can't expect, people that have a stake really in misrepresenting what Cuba represents to turn around. All we can do is sort of heighten the contradictions and expose the hypocrisy, and we're doing our best to do that. So that's the most important thing. But now, having said that, I think we've also made some advances in the U.S. in the last period, and there is a layer of people in the United States. First of all, most people oppose the blockade and the embargo and want to see normalization, especially people that have some knowledge of some of this history, which is more people than either of us might think. But it's also true that there is a layer in the United States of hundreds of thousands of people that have gone to Cuba, that have seen its reality, warts and all, and have been affected by that and have come back different people. People that go to Cuba generally get affected by Cuba more than the propaganda says they're going to go there and be ambassadors for U.S. democracy or something like that. But at the same time, I don't want to paint a false picture. Cuba is hurting right now. Cuba is definitely feeling the accumulated effects of the U.S. policy of asphyxiation. And there are shortages, there are high prices, there is economic distortion. Cuba is really literally under siege. So this is the most important question right now, is lifting the boot of the U.S. Off of Cuba's neck right now.
What do you think needs to be done, can be done, to have United States, as you say, lifting the boot off of Cuba? Does other nations have to get involved and put pressure on the United States to say, hey, what you're doing is not right and is affecting?
I actually think that that's the most effective leverage right now, is the international pressure. The U.S., as I said earlier, is so isolated hemispherically and internationally. We're going to see a vote again at the beginning of the month at the UN, where again, the UN will overwhelmingly vote against the U.S. embargo. The U.S. is more isolated on this question than the Russian Federation is on Ukraine. It's just, that's just the reality. So yes, I do think that to the degree, and this has been happening, that's people like the government of Brazil, the government of Mexico, the government of Colombia, the government of Bolivia, the government of Argentina, all of these governments not only express beautiful words and rhetoric against the blockade. The countries of the Caribbean, who are very eloquent at this UN debate, which I usually watch, but they need to translate that into deeds. It needs to be translated into material aid to counter the impact of the embargo. This is what has to be done. If this is not done, then Cuba is just going to continue to be suffocated. And they will fight. We know that they will fight. And this has to be the result of their fight and our fight, which is to increase material aid to Cuba on a scale much bigger than individual humanitarian donations, on the level of state donations, on the level of companies willing to defy the blockade. It's going to be difficult, but that's what has to be done.
Do you think in your lifetime is going to come to a point where, because obviously this is America's intention, do you think it's going to come to a point where the United States is going to try again to have a war and send troops into Cuba to try to take over and count? I'm just asking.
Everything they do is geared towards creating the conditions whereby they can do that. Yes. This is what they're trying to set the basis for. They know that these counter-revolutionary right-wingers in Miami that they've given all this money to and privilege to and all that stuff, they know that these forces do not have the courage or the wherewithal or the political savvy or anything else to be able to overthrow Cuba. That can only be a job for the U.S. military directly, and they just simply do not have anywhere close to the conditions that are necessary to do that. And this is part of the problem that they face. So to the degree that they remain isolated politically, this is more important. Obviously, the United States, if there's people that in the Pentagon somewhere, I assume that, they could probably press a button somewhere and launch a missile that could destroy X number of things in Havana. They could do that tomorrow. What prevents them from doing it? Certainly not anything moral. They hate Cuba. They really do. They really resent the fact that Cuba is the only country in Latin America that they have not been able to successfully, control. They resent that. From their point of view, I don't blame them. I mean, I'm a firm believer in not having a Pollyanna-ish view. These things get worked out in struggle. So I think we can push the U.S. government back. We can force them, as we did, and they shifted in the last period of the second term of the Obama administration. We're trying to get them to shift again. But the most important thing is for the U.S. people to go to Cuba, see the truth themselves, take advantage of the political space that we have in the United States, that we fought for, and defend our right to oppose the embargo.
Mm. Now, as we're speaking about people coming to Cuba, Black Panthers, as I told you, my uncle, one of them. During the time, during the 60s, 60s, early 70s, there was a handful of Black Panthers where they found themselves going to Cuba, as a place to go to and start a new life because of crimes, whether they did or not. Majority of them didn't do. They would just, United States was just, giving them fake trumped up charges to stop the movement of the Black Panthers, and a lot of them found themselves in Cuba. Why did the Black Panthers decide, hey, listen, we can go anywhere in the world, but Cuba is the destination, and Cuba, the place where we feel, or understands us more than
well, again, you have to put this in the context of the times. There was a period of time in the mid to late 60s, maybe early 70s, some of it still carried over, where the Black Panther Party in particular, but the broader Black nationalist movement overall, especially the militant wings of it, came under tremendous pressure from the US government, from the FBI, part of this COINTELPRO, that included armed repression by the state, included breaking down, murdering Panthers like Fred Hampton, Bunchy Carter, and many, many others over many years. And in that atmosphere, that wing of the Black liberation movement began to feel that to defend themselves, they had to carry out, armed self-defense under this government attack. We can debate, the strategy and tactics of that. That's a whole subject which I've thought about and studied a lot over the years. But the point is that at a certain point, people like Assata Shakur, people like your uncle, like people that were involved in that struggle and that were part of those organizations that got into quite serious confrontation with U.S. governmental authorities. And I know a number that spent long times in prison. And to this day, many of them have been kept in prison that got caught. But a number of them didn't get caught. And they managed to make it to Cuba, which gave them political asylum. And that speaks well of Cuba. That's a whole story. There were other people that, in response to the U.S. Hijacking planes from Cuba to the United States, terrorists, there were many activists, not many, but a handful of activists that hijacked, Black activists, revolutionaries that hijacked planes to the United States. That actually helped lay the basis for Cuba and the United States reach an agreement that the U.S. would no longer do that to Cuban planes. And the Cubans agreed that they would not give shelter to people that hijacked U.S. planes in the United States. But nevertheless, a number of Cubans did make it to Cuba in that period, and the Cubans have refused in a very principled way to return them. Oftentimes, one of the pretexts for the U.S. keeping Cuba on the SSOT list is because the Cuba granted political asylum to the sister Assata Shakur. And people like buffoons like Chris Christie and other people, Menendez, the great Menendez, in between counting his gold bars, in his latest corruption case, always would cite Assata Shakur as an example of why Cuba was terrorist. This is nonsense. And,
Well, that's one of my dreams, to go to Cuba and meet Assata Shakur. But on another note, on another note, I want to know, because we talked about the Black Panthers and different things. I want to know now, currently now, maybe even then, but probably even now. I won't speak to more in the future, in the present time. Would Cuba take in white people who feel detached from American values and just want to or it's also,
again, Cuba has taken in revolutionaries and asylums from all over the world. It had nothing to do with skin tone. They've taken in revolutionaries that are exiled from military regimes in Latin America, Chile, Uruguay. They also take in, and I know you know this, thousands and thousands of doctors that free of charge study to become doctors in Cuba through the Latin American School of Medicine, and then go back to their home countries to practice in working class and what they call underserved communities. So yes, Cuba is always been an asylum. This is one of the reasons also why all this nonsense that the U.S. tries to go after Cuba in the name of democracy. Everybody in Latin America knows that every right-wing military dictatorship and brutal regime in the history of Latin America in the 20th century and the 21st century, Somoza's Nicaragua, the military juntas in Argentina or Chile or Uruguay, every one of those was propped up by the United States. Every one of those was supported by the United States. The Duvalier dictatorship in Haiti. And Cuba, the so-called dictatorship, the so-called tyranny, supported the democratic struggles of the peoples of those countries against those dictatorships. Gave asylum to the people fighting those dictatorships. So when the United States tries to tell Latin America, oh, Cuba's the only country in Latin America that's not a democracy, Latin America just scoffs at that, and they should.
Wow. You dropping.
I'm giving you a lot of good stuff, Ty.
Yes, you are.
But I got to get off pretty soon.
Listen. I know. I'm just gonna ask probably 2 more questions, if that's
all
okay.
Right.
2 more questions, if that's cool with you. Because someone to me asked this question. I'm gonna ask, what did you feel were the pros and cons, if there was, when Cuba was open up for travel, and it's during, I think it was during the Obama administration, and and what did the people in Cuba feel at that time when for that, I don't know if it was maybe for 2 years, a year, I don't know, when during Obama administration, when Cuba was open up and people could travel back and forth, do you feel like there was pros and cons? Do people feel like, hey?
Well, it's not just U.S. travelers, but that's an important thing that did open up in the last period under Obama. But prior to the pandemic, the Cuban tourism industry was really moving along nicely. And I think the average Cuban felt that there were cons, but the pros way outweighed them, in the sense that it brought in tremendously needed foreign exchange that could be used in turn to finance and maintain their free medical system, their wonderful education system, and many of the other advances of the Cuban Revolution. The cons were, there was a little sex tourism that they didn't like and they tried to stamp out. There was, but it helped Cuban industries. It allowed for the food industry and many industries. It created jobs. It was overall a good thing. But it really was given devastating blows during the pandemic, and then the deepening of the blockade by Trump and now by Biden. And that's precisely why they did it then. They saw that Cuba was vulnerable. They saw that even though Cuba did amazing work internationally during the pandemic and continues to, and has its medical internationalism and so on and so forth, but at the same time, they were vulnerable. Thousands of Cubans died during the pandemic, much lower proportionally than anywhere else in Latin America and the world, because of their tremendous public health care system. But today in Cuba, and I hate to say it, but today in Cuba, people are literally dying because of shortages of medicine, because of the effects of the blockade. So again, I keep coming back to this. We need to step up our game. Everybody that is conscious about this needs to take this issue to heart, and we need to mobilize against the blockade.
And real briefly, going back to something else, you said that there's a program, and I want to know if this was, did Fidel Castro implement this, where it was seen as, a few of my friends actually went to Cuba. I ain't gonna say how old I am, but a few of my exactly went there
Younger than me.
To become doctors and different things of that nature. They implemented this program where you can go to Cuba, school was paid for, room, was room and board, everything, and only thing they pretty much ask is that you just go back and serve your community, correct? Like, is that program still going on?
Yes, it's flourishing, actually, and I would suggest people go to the IFCO Pastors for Peace website and go to the Latin American School of Medicine. Just Google that and look into it. They've already filled their applications, I think, for this year, but they just graduated a recent school. It is an inspiring experience to go to the ELAM, Latin American School of Medicine. You have doctors in training from Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, United States, Canada, everywhere, training to be doctors, doing exactly what you said. And this is the example that has to be stamped out. It just does, I don't. But we don't need to, we don't have to ask ourselves why they do that. They do it because they're compelled to do it. It's like, I remember another great line of Malcolm's. Again, he's so funny and witty. He would criticize the people that would pray and sit in and say, "Forgive them, Lord, they know not what they do," when they're smacking them on their head with the police billy club. And Malcolm's line was, "As long as they're doing it, they're experts at it."
Correct. Correct. You're definitely right about that. I'm last question. Let me get you on out of here. Last question. What do you want people, and you kind of probably said it earlier, but just to reiterate, what is the message that you're trying to put out, your organization, you particularly, just about, Cuba, you yourself? What do you want people to hear, as it pertains just to Cuba and the message you want to put out there?
Well, if you're hearing this anywhere in the US, I would say, please go to our website, sign up. We'll send you information. You can get something going in your city, or you can join an existing coalition. There's lots of activities going on. There's travel to Cuba. There's legislative work. Get your city council to pass an anti-embargo resolution. Hit the streets at the last Sunday of every month for Bridges of Love caravans initiated by Cuban Americans. There's lots of things you can hook up with, and just go to our website. It's www.us-Cuba Normalization, one word, .org.
Okay, I got to put that in there. Put that in the link. Okay, I'm definitely going to put that in the link. Wish I could keep you on here longer, but I know you're a busy man and you gotta go. But we
got a big event tonight, but we can do it again if you liked it. I'd love to do it again.
Absolutely. We're gonna dive in more. If you can get in. If you want to bring somebody else in there, because definitely you have a wealth of information, and I appreciate you, my big brother. And again, I thank you for taking time out and being on here and just giving a whole bunch of knowledge and things that I didn't even know about, and I'm sure a lot of people didn't know as well. So thank you for coming on here, and thank you guys for watching. Again, this is Ike.
We'll see you soon.
Yes,
thank you, Ty.
absolutely. Take
care of yourself, brother. Yeah. All right.